a lot of it gets down to asking yourself how you want to present yourself versus what am I? Like, who am I actually? By intentionally blocking stuff out of that subset of answers, you might alienate people before you even really have a chance to bring them into your world.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is the podcast where we cover growing and monetizing your fan base and building a music career with marketing strategies that are working right now based on what we see every day at our music marketing agency and across our community of thousands of artists and bands. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me, as always, today for episode 364 is Circa. Cirque, what's up, dude?
What's up, dude?
How's it going, my man?
Dude, we almost have a full year of podcasts.
I know, man.
You could listen to a podcast episode every day for a year and you wouldn't be caught up.
Yeah, it's a big backlog, especially if you're new here. A lot to catch up on. Actually, I would love to go back in time and listen to some of the earliest episodes.
That's it. We're doing a podcast a day for the next year review episode.
Oh. Well, here we are. This is the homework. We're not going to do anything else for the rest of the year. Just podcast episodes. Hope you guys are asking for this.
I like that.
I'm super excited for today's episode, man. Today we're going to talk about branding, kind of coming off the heels of our conversation last week with Carl Bonner. I think this will be a really interesting topic to dive into, building a three-dimensional brand as an artist. I was actually having a conversation just yesterday that sort of inspired this topic with a producer friend of mine. We were talking about branding and creatives and how we kind of live online and how we represent ourselves. And we were talking about a podcast friend of his that runs a podcast. And he was telling me a story about how this podcast started getting growth after they kind of removed themselves from the rigidity of this brand identity that they had sort of built themselves around. And when they actually started to open themselves up to the various things that they were interested in, music, comedy, there was a number of different sort of like identities that they felt within themselves, but they weren't really putting out there as part of their podcast. And once they opened themselves up to that, they saw their audience kind of explode. And it led to an interesting discussion that I wanted to bring to Creative Juice today about building a brand and kind of going off of some of the questions that we talked about with Carl last week and what we've talked about on the show before as it relates to branding and asking yourself, who you are and what you want to be to your fans online, and how, if you're not careful, that can kind of pigeonhole you into something a little too early and potentially kind of lock you out from audience growth, or at the very least connecting with the audience that you do have.
Yeah, we've mentioned this a couple of times, but it's common to business owners as well. So like one of the first things, like when you get into marketing as like an interest or a hobby or a vocation, the first thing that really happens to you is there's like some myth busting where sort of you come to marketing with these built-in presuppositions of like what a business is supposed to do, how marketing might work, just sort of like default like assumptions. And then like the first thing they do is tell you like, hey, most businesses aren't doing this well. So your assumptions are wrong, because whatever businesses do by default is usually wrong. And that includes like all types of like branding efforts that are sort of like counterintuitive, counterproductive, which is like, I'm going to get a business card because I got to have business cards and they got to have my name and my number on it and what I do, right? That's super important. And then like if you're a services business, you got to have a car wrap on your van. And it has to have your number, the like company name, which is like your family or whatever. And like, we do carpets, right? Or we do, plumbing.
Yeah.
And it's like, none of these things are helpful to generating business. And it's sort of the same in artist world where like the first thing artists think to do is a whole bunch of preparatory tasks that are like disordinately time consuming given like what your actual priorities are. And They have almost nothing to do with your immediate short-term goals or even your long-term goals. So, which is like, you can do a whole lot of branding stuff and really worry about what your image is before you even have any flow, meaning like new listeners coming in and finding out about you, listeners becoming a little bit deeper, maybe customers. Like until you have in these pipelines, let's say we've got a pipeline for new people listening to you and a pipeline for previously like new listeners becoming new subscribers or new customers. We have these pipelines. And until there's like pressure in the pipelines, there's flow. There's no flow to direct, and branding really directs the flow. It conditions it and concentrates it and tells it where to go. Before you have flow, there's no point in any of this. In fact, before you have flow, there's no point in trying to make money. A lot of the most successful entrepreneurs in history said, give me flow and I'll make it profitable. But until then, we're not trying to be profitable. We're trying to get flow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great jumping off point too, is like branding, especially as a creative, but it's true of any kind of business. Branding is really like, it's part of the stickiness process, right? It's the capture or keep attention part. It's what happens when people, fans, prospects, leads, whatever you want to call them, whatever business mode you exist in, whatever industry you're in, it's what happens once people are coming into your business in whatever way you're generating attention. Your brand is what gets communicated to them once they're in your world. They haven't necessarily bought from you. Maybe they haven't even subscribed. They're just becoming aware of you. Branding then is what might keep them there and then start them into the process of going deeper, right? And you're right in saying that, like, if you don't have flow to that stage, then like all of those efforts and all of that deep thinking that you might do not matter. And it might be a waste of your time in the beginning.
Totally. Yeah. So like branding, we could break it down, right? We have like all branding is really just symbolic representations of something that already exists. So your logo is a symbolic representation of all that you represent to your fans. And when they see your logo, it carries with it the meaning of every experience they've had with you. It's just like a little compact representation of you and their relationship with you. So instead of you having to bring all that shit up, you can just show them the logo and they get all that. And the non-visual parts of your brand, vision statement, mission statement, to some degree, like there's looser design elements like graphical patterns. So for instance, like if you see a grid of dots with like a box on it and it's got a heavy shadow background, you might think you're on an entrepreneur asset because that's part of our visual branding, but it's not really our logo or like anything like that, but you would recognize it. So little visual cues, sure. But then there's like emotional parts of your branding, which is like your vision statement, your mission statement, your cultural like artifacts, right? Like little memes and stuff.
That's a lot of the stuff we talked about with Carl last week.
Exactly. Yeah. And those things, you can start to define them from the outset, but the problem is that you don't know what people are going to be attracted to from your character, from your image. And so you might hard define like a small subset of all the things you kind of are. Like you might be wacky, you might be, good at dancing, and you might be super into like history. And it might be the case that your whole audience gravitates towards the part where you're super into history. And now you're stuck with this brand that's like, I'm a wacky dancing guy. It's like, no one cares about that.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about that. So for instance, Mark Rebillet, right? We all kind of know who he is. None of us really know, like, I don't know what his logo looks like. Do you know what his logo looks like?
No.
Right. We don't know what his logo looks like. And we don't know what his vision statement is. We don't know what his mission statement is. And he probably wouldn't be better served by having one. And, he might have said at the outset, well, I'm a loop artist. I do looping. It's like, that's not what you are, dude. When you get your fan base, that's when you know what you are. You're not a looping artist. You are this wacky, bombastic, nerdy, but also like super extroverted. Like, like it's all those things that Mark Rebillet actually represents. But if he had tried to define that at the outset, he might have misstepped critically. So that's why you kind of want to avoid setting like hard ranges for what your brand is early on, because you don't know what it is.
For sure. And I think some of the danger here with trying to build what we'll call like a three-dimensional brand, right, is whether you're doing it too early or not, is I think a lot of times like the questions that guide us in doing that, which are inherently good ones, I think it's stuff like, how do you want to represent yourself online? What pieces of you do you want to show off to the world? And how do you want to do that? All those are good questions, but I think a fundamental thing to pay attention to if you're doing any kind of brand questionnaire or surveying of yourself, or you're doing deep thinking and writing this stuff down and trying to envision who you want to be to your fans, is a lot of it gets down to asking yourself how you want to present yourself versus what am I? Like, who am I actually? By intentionally blocking stuff out of that subset of answers, you might alienate people before you even really have a chance to bring them into your world or allow them to stick. And I think that's what Bruce and I, my producer friend that we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, that's what we were sort of talking about yesterday, was like, yeah, by asking these questions and by asking them too soon and then defining yourself by them, you can really like constrain yourself. You can constrain your brand before you should.
Yeah, I think there's like three big risks. The first is that you waste a lot of time, because it takes time to like write out your vision statement and mission statement. It takes time to decide, how does this sort of like loose association for what I think my brand is, it takes time to like translate that into actual things you do.
Yeah.
And then you might run the risk of thinking you need a logo right now. And then you got to think about, how does my wacky dancing, brand like translate into a logo? So you might waste time. That's risk one. Risk number three, I'll do that one next.
Oh, we're jumping around here.
Yeah, we're jumping around. Index 3 in the risk list is that you will waste time on the other end where you're like trying to condition what your brand is. And so you don't do certain things because you're like, that doesn't fit my brand.
Yeah, dude, that's a really good one, especially as it comes down to the music too. Like we've talked before about like, all right, if you're thinking to yourself, like, what does my music represent to my fans? And you might say something like, well, like, I want my fans to relate to my music in the way that, like, my music is the music that you listen to on an Uber ride home from a party on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. Or I'm the soundtrack to your first college party, or I'm the soundtrack to your wedding, the lead up to your wedding, or whatever it might be. When you start thinking that way, what happens if you're not that,
Yeah, totally. This happens a lot. And this happens more before you actually have a brand, which we'll get to in a second of like what that is and why I mean, like, even if you've already defined it, you don't have it. Between when you define it or don't, and when you actually have one, is this space where you opt out of opportunities. You don't do certain things that would be beneficial for your career because it doesn't fit your brand.
Yeah.
Because you thought when you came into this that your brand was something that you just like dictate, that you like, that you, what's that word where it's like, it means like in the way that God dictates. You divine. You don't divine your brand, right? Like, right? Before you divined your brand, like that's not how you do it. Your brand, and this is like something that took me a long time to learn, it's really better represented as something that your customers and fans tell you, not something that you tell your customers and fans. Because you really don't know what people are going to identify with, react to, get incited by, what's going to get people to pay attention. You don't know what that is. But a lot of times when artists like grow really fast, it's because people latched on to something that they really like. We've seen that with our buddies, the 502s. We've seen that with, tons of artists throughout the years, especially ones that blow up without sort of this major label machine.
Yeah.
They often have very rigid characteristics that are like super memorable.
Yeah.
But you don't know what that is. Like you're in an experimental environment where you are trying lots of different things. that fit within the range of what you're comfortable like doing or what you want to do. And within that, there's a subset of things that people will pay attention to, will come to love you for. And you need to be listening for what that ends up being. And if you define your brand now as like, oh, it's the whole range of things I'm into or would do, or it's this particular corner of what I'm into or would do, if you're wrong about that, you're not going to have your ears open for when people start actually paying attention and trying to tell you through their behaviors and what they end up watching that they actually like. Instead of setting a brand at the beginning, you should be listening for your brand in the middle. So that's why I skipped the index, is because it's like, let's talk about, you waste a bunch of time in the front. You could waste a bunch of time at the end or miss a lot of opportunities on either side because you're like so stuck in your ways about what your brand's going to be or what you wanted it to be. And then you miss out because of those things. You miss out when your audience actually tells you what your brand is.
Dude, yeah. And I'm glad you skipped to number 3 and then came back to that risk being number 2, because that sort of big chunky middle is where the brand lives. That's where you learn it. That is actually where you condition it. And I want to tack on to what you were saying about listening to your audience, because this can happen actively. Like, you can actually ask your fans, once you have flow, you can talk to them. We did a brand survey not too long ago for one of our clients at IndieX, just asking like, hey, when you see my merch, what does it make you think of? Like, what does it make you feel? And the answers that we got from fans in this survey, that they thought that they were just taking to help give ideas of how to make more cool stuff for them. Like, the answers that we got totally surprised this artist and their team. It was like, oh, wow, I had no idea that the fans, associated what we're making with, these phrases or this sort of culture or style or anything. Like, it totally blew their mind. It was awesome to see. It was brand building in real time. It was like getting real active feedback from the fans. That was really cool, but it can also happen passively, right? You look at view consumption, the things they're watching, the content that they're consuming, how they're engaging with it. You can pay attention to the comments that you're getting and what people are saying in them, what the content of their messages are all about. It's kind of like it's the reverse, really. It's like, okay, I'm putting messaging out there to my audience, however that might be. It might look like content. It might look like email. It might look like the way that I'm actually putting music together. That's how I'm messaging out to my audience. And then I'm hearing and listening to the content that they're giving back to me. And I'm using that. It's creating like a feedback loop.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I've been in communities where a brand gets built and it's usually emergent. It's like, you can see this leader figure like throwing out lots of different, like potentially memorable, potentially repeatable, like cultural items, slogans. These could be like song lyrics or choruses. They could be like images. It could be anything. It could be like a particular way that you are when you're on video. It could be anything. Really, anything could become a cultural item. And the thing that your community repeats most, that they all kind of like becomes common, like they say it back and forth to each other.
It's the inside jokes.
Right. It's an inside joke. Yes, exactly. And it's like your job when you start out building a brand is to throw out lots of things that people could latch onto and then pay really close attention when they do. It's super interesting to me. How big was the artist you said that did that survey?
Big.
Yeah, it's super interesting to me that like you can get that big and be completely surprised or taken off guard by what your audience is actually into, what your brand actually is. It just goes to show you that like, if you like, it's easy to not listen. It's easy to not like have your ears open for what your community thinks your brand is.
Here's what's really interesting about that artist. And I think this will tie in nicely as like a strategic piece of advice to kind of answer this question of how do you actually start going about building a 3-dimensional brand is like, number one, they had what they would consider a brand. They had things that they threw out to their fans. They had catchphrases. There were like noticeable things that they would put. They had a visual identity. They had logos. They had kind of everything that you traditionally or conventionally would associate with a brand, right? And they also had just like their inside jokes with their audience. However, what was really interesting about this sort of active stuff was they had the baseline of the brand. And then when they were listening, they allowed the feedback that they got from the fans, for example, in this survey, to then influence how the brand changed and how it evolved over time. And I think that's where one of the risks exist is like you over condition, right? Risk number 3. If you're listening correctly and you've got that foundation, then you can pivot the brand. You can make the shifts with the audience and you can address how like your people are relating to you and how they're looking at you and associating with you and how they, you know, take that into account in the way that they interact with you and how you become a part of their day to day.
Yeah, it's super interesting that like it really is the case that this is like one of the easiest things to mess up. And it sucks because like the downstream effects of that, the fallout of that, the negative result of that is not sharp and obvious. It is like cumulative and like constant and in the background. It's like you are 20% less efficient than you even knew you could be because you made these like hard decisions at the wrong time. Like, cause it's never going to become very obvious to you until you do something like that survey they did where you're like, oh, like what we thought people were like interested in is not at all what they were interested in or found cool. And it's like, realize you could never realize that. There are some artists who never realize that. And so, yeah, like that's just like why it's so important to take a student mentality to what your brand might be and think of yourself more as like you're experimenting, right? You're doing lots of things that could become these cultural items. You're trying out repeating things, right? Maybe you have like turns of phrase, right? And maybe that's just a natural consequence of who you are. But then maybe you hear a community member say it, something that you say all the time. Someone else said it in your community or in your fan base. And now it's like, well, let's make some media with that. If they like that, let's add that to stuff. Let's do like a little GIF. Let's, you know, whatever. Like just start noticing what gets repeated and then evolve it. You know, it's memetics. It's memes, dude.
Yeah.
It's literally like meme science. I think that's way more relevant to branding than like, you know, what people traditionally think of as branding.
Yeah, dude, I couldn't agree more. And I think actually the process of building a three-dimensional brand becomes way simpler that way. You know, like sure, ask yourself the questions of how you want to represent yourself online. Ask yourself like what interests you want to put out there and then start doing them. Start doing that. Like and then start doing those things like present yourself the way you think you want to and throw out those sort of like cultural moments or catchphrases or memes, throw out things that might hook your audience. But then don't be so dogmatic about it, right? Because especially in the early stages, like once you get flow or as you're getting flow, you might find that it's a hard left turn or a hard right turn towards what your fans are actually associating with you and what your brand actually is. And the less dogmatic you can be about it, the easier it is to steer into the direction that you really should go. And if you can do that, then you've got a fluid brand that really is like three-dimensional. It allows you to encompass everything that you are as a person into the creative career that you're building.
Yeah. Brands are kind of indistinguishable from communities of all sorts and cults.
Yeah.
It's like, what's different about a community than just a random assortment of people? It's like, well, they all have like a common language. They all have common knowledge that is foreign to any outsiders of that community, right? And part of the appeal of when you first get into a community is that you see all these people who have this knowledge set and this behavior set that you've never experienced. And what it really is like, it's the difference between common knowledge, common understanding, popular memetics, the zeitgeist, and your knowledge, your understanding, your community. That's the difference. And so when people get into your community, they start to notice that other people inside it reference stuff that you don't understand. You know what I mean? Like
it's like you're going to the party and everybody is wearing a certain color or talking a certain way.
Right. It's like, how is it that I made it all the way to adulthood and all these people know something that I'm completely unaware of? Right.
Yeah. And it naturally drives a sense of FOMO, or like, I want to fit in here.
Yes. It's the desire the appeal of the brand is generated entirely by community members exercising the brand. That's what's appealing about it, man. No one looks at your logo and is like, oh, that's so friggin' cool. I have to have a t-shirt of it. No one cares. But if they're part of an embedded community for which that logo is a symbol, now they care because they care about the community. And so that's what community building really is all about, is like, let's break off from the herd. It's like seceding from popular culture, right?
Yeah.
You're saying we're gonna break off and form our own laws and our own memes. So the beginning of that, the genesis of that, is typically tons of experimentation and then paying really close attention to what starts to gain traction mimetically and amplifying that. And if you come into this community and you say, oh, I know exactly what people are going to gravitate towards. I know exactly what people are going to end up liking and repeating. I know exactly what's going to go on. You're fooling yourself and you're going to miss out on a huge opportunity, which is to just like have this thing snowball like crazy. So yeah, and that's something that wasn't obvious to me maybe like years ago. My comments on this subject would have been relegated to like me just saying, who cares about your brand? Go sell some shit. Right?
Yeah.
Who cares? No one cares. Like make some money first and then we can do all of that. Right. But now I'm starting to realize like, well, they can go hand in hand. Like, yes, I think in general, people focus way more on brand than they should and way less on sales than they should and business than they should. But that doesn't mean that focusing on brand in the right way couldn't be incredibly useful to you early on in your career.
For sure. And I think there's something rewarding about focusing on it. And that's why people gravitate to it, especially early on. It's like, okay, I'm making this music. It invokes a feeling in me. And it seems like, you know, if you're starting to build an audience or if you've already built one, it's like, okay, well, it's also doing something to other people, right? So I want to try to identify like, why does it make me feel something? Why is it making other people feel something? And the fact that's happening then throws you into the brand pool, right? And that's an easier, more creative pool to fall into, I think, or stumble into drunkenly than like customer creation is. And that's why I think branding and marketing like wrestle with each other, at least in creative businesses, is like, it's easier for me as a creative to like get into my head and start thinking like, oh, well, the brand is this and I represent this in the world and I want to have this logo and these color schemes and I want everything to look like this and I want all my settings in my videos to be like this. It's natural for creative people to go that direction, right? And so I think in some ways it's like good to follow that natural sort of like path, so long as you are aware of the fact that if you stay there too long, one, you incur all of those three brand risks that we talked about, and two, you incur the risk of then not focusing on actual business objectives and growth.
Yeah. I mean, your allegiance, your loyalty should be to the ground truth. It should be to what are people actually like, not like, what do I think they might like? It should, and
Right.
if you start getting like married to your presupposition of what people are going to gravitate towards, then you're going to have a really bad time. And it's like in programming, I've been benefited by this approach of like, and when I go to build a piece of software, I'm not going to plan out how it should go because I'm an idiot. I'm like barely know anything in programming yet. So I'm going to go start trying to do things and I'm going to let the hard reality of trying to do those things condition what the architecture of the code should be. Like how this app should be organized and built and what tools we use to build it is entirely going to be dictated by me bumping off a wall that I didn't know was there.
Yeah.
And I can't see that wall until I go bump off of it. Right. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like, you don't know anything about what your brand is, dude. You don't know anything about what people are going to like or what they're going to find cool. And sometimes like don't get me wrong, there are cases in history where people have like hard defined what their brand is going to be and it ended up working out really well, but it's not the average case. And it's like an incredible risk. Like it's taking a huge unnecessary risk and spending a lot of effort to like maybe be like very wrong when by the time you start realizing you're wrong, you could have already been successful.
Yeah. I mean, to your point there, a lot of businesses don't, like in practice, may not even like identify like their mission statement, vision statement, or core values well into the stage where they actually have customers to have core values reflected towards, and a team, right? People working for them, employees, where they can actually communicate about these things and uncover them. It's like, okay, well, we already have something going here. What is it? What is it actually? Like, what are we doing? Not like, what do we want to be? It's what are we? You know, it's present tense rather than future tense.
Yeah. It's like you literally throw shit at the wall till it sticks. And the second it sticks, you go look at it and say, what stuck? Where did it stick? And why did it stick? Right?
Yeah.
That's it. You know, it's an interesting parallel because it's like, man, the greatest entertainers that I've ever seen, like live and on record, like the greatest. And that's from James Brown all the way down to my local hero, Eugene Snowden. There's a common thread among all of them, which is they're really good at getting out in front of a crowd and letting the crowd dictate how they perform.
Yeah.
They get out in front of a crowd and they just start literally iterating at like a new character per second until one of them gets a rise out of the audience. So like from interest song, like my local hero, Eugene, like in the middle of a song will change up what he's doing until the audience starts going nuts. And then it's like, okay, we're going to chase that, you know? And it's like, man, James Brown didn't decide what James Brown was. Like the people decided what James Brown was. He just iterated until he noticed that it was like, oh, they like this.
Yeah. And if you look at music throughout history, like that's the truth of most great artists.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, comedy, we talk about comedy often on this podcast, but I think comedy is a great microcosm to look at for this because you can really see it there. When a comedian latches onto a bit or a character, like you know.
Yeah, and people get all offended at comedians. It's like, dude, this is just what people liked. Like you wouldn't know who they were if this wasn't an incredibly successful strategy, and they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't successful. So like really what you're looking at is a mirror to society at that moment.
Yeah.
You know,
art is a mirror, dude.
Be a mirror, dude.
And your brand, it's a mirror.
Yeah. And until you have like a really keen sense, like you've been doing this for years and you have your brand dialed in, maybe then you can start to make like concentrated bets about what the next thing is brand wise, because you kind of can start to get a sense of like, where's my community trending? Why does what we're doing now no longer serve us? And where is it kind of going? And how does that actually communicate with the outside world? And then you can start like, you know, artists do this all the time. Kanye West with Yeezus, like when he comes out on SNL and he has like spikes and like black leather and shit and like a full on mask over his face where you can't even see any of his face. Like that kind of stuff. Like that's a hard pivot from where he was when you last saw him. But it's him intuiting like, okay, I've spent time leading these people, paying close attention to what they react to. And I've spent time studying the world culture and I can see where this is all headed. I'm going to make a bet. I'm going to make a bet that and the payoff is I'm going to take this risk. I'm risking that I'm wrong and people do not gel with the direction I'm headed in. And it doesn't really capture like where the zeitgeist is and just it flops. That's my risk. My reward is that I am seen as leading the culture, not following.
Right.
And you can make those concentrated bets once you have that sort of like really like deep experience with your audience and the culture at large. But until then, like, don't make those bets, dude. You can't afford that.
Yeah, it's true. And I think this comes back to like starting off with a foundation of things that you want to represent or plan to, and then you iterate from there, right? You listen. Because then you're not really making big bets. You're making small, like micro bets with your audience. And you're just allowing them to pick out what they like. And then you refine it.
Yeah, it's bet sizing, dude.
Yeah.
It's bet sizing. When you pick a branding element, you are making a bet, and the size of your bet should be really small when your stack is small. And as your stack grows, as your bets pay off, then you can make bigger bets.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever gone this deep on branding before.
No.
This was a lot of fun. And I think we definitely could continue the conversation into like the community building sort of realm, right? Because that's where it all happens. Like this was the playbook or like the rule book, so to speak. And then where it's actually put into place is in the community, like what's actually happening in the wild, the stuff that you're putting out there and the feedback that you're getting from your fans about it. Well, this was awesome. Thanks for sharing this episode with me, man. Branding philosophy. I love it.
Likewise.
Hell yeah. Well, I hope you guys dug this and take some of these ideas to heart whether you're caught up in thinking about building a brand or what you want your brand to be. And instead, just look to cement yourself into what you're doing right now and how your people are interacting with it. And allow that to kind of expand your mind towards what you can be doing from a branding perspective, how it interacts with your marketing, how it interacts with what you're creating. And then you can make changes on the go and not be so locked into a dogma or your brand guidelines in a way that kind of doesn't serve you.
Yeah.
But that's it for now. We'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.
Peace.
Peace.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast, feel the West Coast, feel me? Say what?